Ryan Reynolds couldn't understand why his dog Baxter kept digging through old boxes in the garage. One day, curious, he opened the boxes and found old videotapes inside. When he watched those tapes, what he saw revealed the real inspiration source for Deadpool's most iconic scenes. Ryan Reynolds was at a crossroads in his career. After the critical disaster of X-Men Origins Wolverine, where his beloved Deadpool character had been butchered beyond recognition, Hollywood had written him off as leading man material. He was back in his Vancouver home, staring at a pile of rejected scripts and wondering if his superhero days were over. His 3-year-old golden retriever mix, Baxter, had developed an unusual obsession with the garage. Every morning, the dog would scratch at the garage door until Ryan let him in, then spend hours digging through cardboard boxes that had been stored there since Ryan's move from Los Angeles. "What are you looking for, buddy?" Ryan would ask, watching Baxter methodically investigate every corner of the cluttered space. The garage was filled with the detritus of a working actor's life: old headshots, scripts from auditions that went nowhere, promotional materials from forgotten projects, and boxes of personal items that Ryan hadn't touched in years. Most of it had belonged to his father, Jim Reynolds, who had passed away in 2015, but whose belongings Ryan had never fully sorted through. Baxter seemed particularly drawn to a stack of unmarked boxes in the far corner, covered by an old tarp. These had been in storage so long that Ryan couldn't even remember what was inside them. Every time he'd planned to go through his father's things, the emotional weight had been too much, and he'd put it off for another day. But Baxter was persistent. The dog would sit by those boxes for hours, occasionally whining softly as if trying to communicate something important. Ryan was too distracted by his career crisis to pay much attention to his dog's archaeology project. Little did he know that Baxter was about to uncover the key to Hollywood redemption. On a particularly frustrating afternoon in March 2010, after receiving yet another rejection for a superhero project, Ryan decided to finally investigate what had captured Baxter's obsessive attention. He pulled the tarp off the mysterious boxes and opened the first one. Inside were dozens of VHS tapes, carefully labeled in his father's neat handwriting: Ryan, Stand-Up Practice 1995 to 1998. Comedy Club, Performances, Character Workshop Sessions. Ryan's heart clenched. He had forgotten that his father had meticulously recorded his early attempts at comedy and acting, believing in his son's talent even when Ryan doubted himself. But it was the second box that changed everything. Inside were more tapes, but these were labeled differently: Improv Sessions with Andy, Weekend Comedy Warriors, The Reynolds Comedy Vault. Ryan didn't immediately recognize what these were, but Baxter became more excited as each tape was revealed, his tail wagging furiously. The third box contained something that made Ryan stop breathing: a tape labeled The Deadpool Sessions, Ryan's original character work, 1997. Ryan stared at the tape. That was years before he'd ever heard of the Deadpool comic character. How could there be a tape with that name from his teenage years? With trembling hands, he carried the tape into the house and fed it into his old VCR player. What he saw on that fuzzy home-recorded footage would change everything he thought he knew about himself, his father, and the character that would define his career. The tape began with grainy footage of 20-year-old Ryan in what looked like his childhood basement, practicing comedy routines. But this wasn't the clean, family-friendly material he usually performed. This was raw, irreverent, fourth-wall-breaking comedy that sounded remarkably familiar. On the tape, young Ryan was performing as a character he called the Deadpool. Not the Marvel superhero, but a street-smart wisecracker who constantly made jokes about being in a movie, referenced other actors, and delivered rapid-fire pop culture commentary with perfect comedic timing. "Ladies and gentlemen," the young Ryan on tape announced to an imaginary audience, "welcome to the show where the guy in the red shirt pretends to be someone else but keeps reminding you that he's just a guy in a red shirt." Ryan watched in amazement as his teenage self performed material that would later become signature Deadpool moves, breaking the fourth wall, making meta-commentary about superhero movies, and delivering one-liners with the exact timing and attitude that would make the character beloved worldwide. But the real shock came when his father's voice could be heard from behind the camera. "That's it, Ryan. That character, that's your goldmine. Someday you're going to play a superhero just like that, and everyone's going to love him because he's not trying to be perfect. He's just trying to be real." Ryan paused the tape, his hands shaking. His father had seen it, had predicted it, had encouraged him to develop this irreverent, self-aware character years before Marvel's Deadpool comic had even achieved mainstream recognition. Baxter sat beside him, tail wagging slowly, as if he understood the magnitude of what they had uncovered. Ryan spent the next several hours watching every tape in the collection. What he discovered was a treasure trove of character development that his conscious mind had completely forgotten. The tapes revealed that the Deadpool had been Ryan's creative outlet during his teenage years, a character he'd developed to cope with his father's battle with Parkinson's disease. The irreverent humor, the constant jokes about pain and suffering, the refusal to take anything too seriously. It had all been young Ryan's way of processing difficult emotions. "The thing about pain," his teenage self said on one tape, "is that if you don't laugh at it, it laughs at you. And trust me, pain has a terrible sense of humor." The character's signature move of talking directly to the audience had emerged from Ryan's realization that performing for an imaginary crowd was more comfortable than dealing with real-world problems. The meta-commentary was his way of maintaining distance from emotions that felt too big to handle. Most remarkably, the tapes showed his father actively encouraging this character development. Jim Reynolds had somehow understood that his son was creating something special, even if neither of them could have predicted how it would eventually manifest. "Don't ever lose that edge, Ryan," his father's voice said on one particularly clear recording. "The world needs characters who aren't afraid to tell the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable." Ryan realized that when he'd first read the Deadpool comics years later, the character had felt familiar not because of the superficial similarities, but because he'd already been living inside Ryan for decades. Armed with this rediscovered foundation, Ryan approached the Deadpool project with renewed confidence and a clearer understanding of what made the character work. The studios had rejected his vision because they thought his version was too irreverent, too self-aware, too different from traditional superhero movies. Now Ryan understood why his instincts had been so strong. He wasn't just playing Deadpool, he was returning to a character he'd been developing for over a decade. He rewrote his Deadpool pitch, incorporating specific elements from his teenage character work. The fourth wall breaking wasn't just a comic book gimmick. It was a deeply personal coping mechanism. The constant jokes weren't just for laughs. They were armor against a world that could be randomly cruel. When Ryan presented his revised vision to 20th Century Fox, something had changed in his performance. The character felt lived in, authentic, like it was coming from someplace real rather than just being copied from comic book pages. "This feels different," noted producer Simon Kinberg during Ryan's screen test. "It's like you've been playing this character your whole life." Ryan just smiled. "In a way, I have been." The studio greenlit the project, partly because Ryan's passion for the character was so evident and specific. He wasn't just an actor trying to book a superhero movie. He was someone who understood this character from the inside out. During filming of the first Deadpool movie, Ryan brought Baxter to set whenever possible. The dog had become his good luck charm and, in a very real sense, his creative consultant. Director Tim Miller noticed that Ryan's best performances often came after he'd spent time with Baxter between takes. "There's something about that dog that keeps you grounded in the character," Miller observed. Ryan began incorporating tiny elements from his father's encouraging voice into Deadpool's internal monologue. The character's resilience, his refusal to stay down, no matter how much punishment he took, reflected the lessons Jim Reynolds had taught his son about facing life's challenges with humor and determination. Some of Deadpool's most memorable one-liners were actually variations on jokes that teenage Ryan had performed for his father's camera decades earlier. The movie's emotional core, Deadpool's relationship with Vanessa and his willingness to sacrifice everything for love, mirrored the deep family bonds that Ryan had witnessed in his own childhood. Baxter seemed to understand his role in the creative process. Crew members noticed that the dog would become more attentive during emotional scenes, as if he was monitoring Ryan's connection to the material. "It's like he knows when you're really hitting it," observed stunt coordinator Philip J. Silvera. "That dog has better instincts about performance than most directors." The success of Deadpool validated not just Ryan's career choices, but his father's early faith in his son's unique comedic voice. The character that had emerged from a teenager's attempt to cope with family illness had become a billion-dollar franchise that redefined superhero cinema. Ryan kept his father's tapes in a place of honor in his home office and would often watch them before important Deadpool meetings or filming sessions. Baxter learned to recognize the sound of the old VCR and would automatically position himself beside Ryan's chair whenever the tapes came out. "My dad saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself," Ryan reflected during promotional interviews for the film. "He encouraged me to develop this character when I was just a kid trying to make sense of the world. 30 years later, that character changed my life." The meta-commentary that became Deadpool's signature wasn't just a clever narrative device. It was Ryan's way of honoring his father's memory by refusing to take himself too seriously, even in the midst of massive Hollywood success. Ryan established a foundation in his father's name, focused on supporting young performers who were developing unconventional, comedic voices. "Every kid who feels like they don't fit the traditional mold deserves to have someone believe in their weirdness," he said at the foundation's launch. Today, Baxter is older and grayer, but still serves as Ryan's unofficial creative advisor. The dog has appeared in behind-the-scenes footage for multiple Deadpool projects and has his own following among fans who know the story of how he uncovered the character's true origins. Ryan credits Baxter with saving his career by forcing him to confront a part of his past that he'd forgotten was important. "Without Baxter's archaeological skills, I might never have remembered that Deadpool was already inside me, waiting to come back out." The original tapes have been digitally preserved and are displayed in Ryan's production company offices. New actors working with Ryan often ask to see the Baxter Discovery tapes to understand how authentic character development works. "The lesson isn't just about finding old tapes," Ryan explains to young performers. "It's about paying attention when someone, or some dog, is trying to show you something important about yourself." Baxter's story has become part of Deadpool lore, with Ryan frequently crediting his dog during interviews and award shows. "I'd like to thank my dog, who's a better talent scout than most agents in Hollywood." The garage where Baxter made his discovery has been converted into Ryan's home writing studio, with a special dog bed positioned exactly where Baxter first started digging through those mysterious boxes. The story of Ryan Reynolds and Baxter reminds us that sometimes our greatest creative breakthroughs come from unexpected sources, including the four-legged family members who pay attention to details we might miss. Baxter didn't just help Ryan find old tapes, he helped him rediscover a part of himself that had been waiting decades to emerge. The character that brought joy to millions of fans worldwide might never have reached its full potential without a curious dog's determination to dig through dusty boxes. This story also shows us the power of family legacy and how the people who believe in us can influence our success in ways we don't realize until years later. Has your pet ever led you to an unexpected discovery? Have they helped you remember something important that you'd forgotten? Share your story in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Famous Tales for more incredible stories of celebrity pets who became creative partners in ways no one could have predicted. Because every celebrity has a tale to tell, and sometimes those tales uncover the stories that change everything.